There are songs that feel written by people, and then there are songs that feel like they were handed down by the universe itself. The Killing Moon by Echo and the Bunnymen belongs to that second category. It's the sound of fate casting a long shadow at twilight, a song that Ian McCulloch swore was already written by the stars before he ever put pen to paper. But how does a scrappy, volatile band from Liverpool, barely holding themselves together, create what many might consider the perfect song of the 1980s? The answer lies in a dream McCulloch had, a half-forgotten trip to Russia, an accident with a guitar riff, and the kind of studio chaos that nearly broke the band. This is the story of celestial chants colliding with human tension, of how four young musicians wrestled with each other and with fate itself to pull something timeless out of the ether. This is a story about how surrendering to destiny became the band's own destiny. Hi, I'm Andy Fenstermaker, host of Poetic Wax, a weekly music history series and podcast where I dig into the record collection I've been building since the 1990s and explore the sometimes little known or little told history of a band, album, or song from within. The story begins as many mythic moments do, in the stillness of pre-dawn. Ian McCulloch awoke and with startling clarity found the following refrain echoing through his head. Fate up against your will, through the thick and thin, he will wait until you give yourself to him. He didn't draft or labor over it. Instead, he later wrote, quote, I just sat bolt upright in bed with this line in my head. You don't dream things like that and remember them. That's why I've always half credited the lyric to God. This moment, simultaneously fragile and divine, shattered the boundary between dream and waking life. Ian, restless, reached for his guitar. Experimentation with David Bowie's Space Oddity, played backward, yielded chord fragments that bloomed something wholly new, familiar, and yet hauntingly original. He acknowledged that, quote, by the time I'd finished, it sounded nothing like Space Oddity. Here is where fate first laid its claim. A verse born not of toil, but of sudden illumination, setting the stage for what would become one of post-punk's most iconic songs. As enchantment spilled from McCulloch's chords, the band converged. Les Pattinson anchored the song with a rumbling mandolin-tinged bass, an echo he and Will Sargent had absorbed during an offbeat excursion to Russia. Quote, on a trip to Russia, we visited a museum of tractor parts, and came back with that mandolin sound. That was Sargent recalling the experience in a 2015 article in The Guardian. That peculiar detour became the spine of the groove behind The Killing Moon, grounding it in this otherworldly drone. But it wasn't only Les shaping the song's pulse. Pete DeFreitas leaned into subtlety. Behind the drum kit, his cymbals and brushes allowed the bass to hypnotize and the guitars to float. His touch kept the piece alive, breathing, preventing it from collapsing into heaviness. In rehearsal, the four fell into an orbit, McCulloch chanting fragments from a dream, Sargent layering ornamental chords, Pattinson's drone binding them together, and DeFreitas coaxing it and carrying it all into motion. Ian already felt destiny humming. Even in those early rehearsals, he recognized a song that seemed to arrive from somewhere else entirely. The influences that had haunted him, like David Bowie and Scott Walker, the cinematic sweep of 60s orchestral pop, well, they surfaced in a way that felt inevitable. He would later insist, quote, when I sing The Killing Moon, I know there isn't a band in the world who's got a song anywhere near that. Sargent reflected years later that Mac might have come up with the lyrics and all, but it was definitely a team effort. Thus, the seed gifted in bed found fertile ground in collaboration. Before getting into the band's struggles with recording the song, I want to pause for a brief moment. You can check out the transcript of this episode within a day or two of its publishing and hear music discussed from within this over on my Substack. Sign up for free at poeticwax.substack.com. Also, quick shout out and thanks to my paid subscribers. Join today for just $2 a month and get early access to new episodes, members-only videos, and more. The Bunnymen entered Crescent Studios in Bath in late 1983 with a sense of ambition, but also simmering with tension. The Killing Moon was already special in rehearsal, yet the pressure to deliver in the studio was immense. Ian was battling a head cold and was uneasy during sessions. not satisfied with how things were coming together. The rest of the band, however, pushed forward. Producer David Lord helped shape the sonic palette, experimenting with textures that would accentuate the song's nocturnal quality. It was during these Both sessions that an accident delivered the track's signature Spanish-influenced opening. Guitarist Will Sargent had been tuning up, leaving behind a glistening arpeggio. He would later discuss how it found its way into the song. Quote, "It was just something I did when we were tuning up. Then we went out for a curry, and when we came back, producer David Lord had looped it up and punched it back in. We all thought it sounded great. I spent the next 20-odd years trying to remember how I did it." What began as a throwaway tuning exercise turned into the song's portal, a special gateway that set the mood from the very first note. But McCulloch still refused to record his vocals in Both, convinced that the track needed a different touch. Pete proposed a move to Amazon Studios in Liverpool, and it was here that the song truly came alive. Somewhere in the mix, Mac suggested to Freitas shift to using brushes. This created a lighter, more cinematic drum sound that allowed Pattinson's bass and Sargent's guitar to shimmer in the foreground. The human drama matched the sonic breakthroughs. McCulloch, exhausted and defensive, returned home one morning after finishing vocals only to find his wife furious at his lateness. His reply was simply to play her the tape. Quote, "I played her the song and said, 'That's what we've been doing.' And she cried." By the time recording wrapped, the fractures had given way to something larger than any of them. A song born in tension, chance, and persistence, all polished into a glorious piece of nocturnal majesty. If the music was sculpted from accidents and persistence, the lyrics carried an almost sacred weight. Ian himself has always insisted that The Killing Moon isn't simply a song, it's something closer to scripture. As he stated in The Guardian in 2015, quote, "It's about everything from birth to death, eternity and God, whatever that is, and the eternal battle between fate and human will. It contains the answer to the meaning of life. It's my to be or not to be." End quote. The imagery is steeped in celestial metaphor. Lines like "your sky, all hung with jewels," reflected McCulloch's fascination with astronomy, nurtured from childhood evenings watching the sky at night and Star Trek and marveling over the moon landing. He described the lyric as half gifted by God, half channeled through his lifelong preoccupation with the cosmos. Unlike many Echo and the Bunnymen songs, The Killing Moon felt almost predestined. That sense of inevitability, of surrender to something greater. Well, that echoes in the refrain, "Fate up against your will." These words transformed the music, and the music added weight to the words. The Killing Moon became less a pop song than a prayer disguised as melody, a hymn whispered in the language of stars and shadows. McCulloch never sounded like he wrote these lines. He sounded like their vessel, the conduit through which something older and more eternal slipped into the world. That's why the lyrics still strike with the force of revelation. They don't merely describe fate. They are fate, sung into the glow of the moon. By January 20, 1984, The Killing Moon emerged as the lead single from Ocean Rain, an album the band envisioned as grand cinematic artistry. Though The Killing Moon featured more subtle string work, including Adam Peters on cello and producer-led keys versus a full orchestra, it still radiated orchestral resonance found elsewhere in the album. Ocean Rain's broader orchestration featured a 35-piece ensemble in Paris that framed the song's overall atmosphere. It was an echo of myth and majesty that elevated it above the pop fray. This orchestral dressing mirrored its metaphysical themes, offering sonic depth befitting its thematic gravity. And upon its release, The Killing Moon climbed to number 9 on the UK singles chart, cementing its place as one of the band's highest charting hits. Yet, its life extended well beyond that initial success. It permeated film and pop culture, perhaps most notably in Donnie Darko in 2001, a union that elevated both the song and the film. Sargent recalls they agreed to sync it for £3,000, assuming it would go nowhere. But when the director's cut replaced the track with "In Excess," he was a bit dismissive, stating, quote, "Aren't some people knobheads?" It also ghosted through films like Grosse Point Blank, Gia, and The Girl Next Door, universes where its ethereal pull found new meanings. See, I can pronounce that word sometimes. Decades later, the song lives on in covers, Pavement, Churches, Thea Gilmore, and even gaming lore, with Cyberpunk 2077, well, the expansion of it being named after the song. I'd argue that there's no comparison. The Killing Moon stands as Echo and the Bunnymen's greatest achievement, though I really do have an affinity for Nocturnal Me. It's the product of divine spark meeting human craft head on. It's a song born at the edge of sleep, shaped by collaboration, refined through doubt, and dressed in cinematic grandeur. It's both intimate and universal, a hymn to fate, art, and surrender. In McCulloch's own words, for me, The Killing Moon is more than just a song. It's a psalm, almost hymnal. It is, indeed. It's the melody we hear in the dark, small, secret, and eternal.